Let's dive right into this explainer by immediately challenging a very pervasive myth we've all seen in the business world. You know the one. The idea that the smart leader, the person relying purely on raw intellect and technical expertise, is the one destined for the top. We literally all know a story about a brilliant, highly skilled executive who got promoted only to completely crash and burn in a leadership role. And on the flip side, we've seen people with solid but maybe not extraordinary technical skills totally soar. So, what's actually going on here? Well, the answer lies in emotional intelligence. To put things into perspective, the crucial takeaway here is 90%. When researchers dug into the competency models from nearly 200 large global companies, they found something honestly staggering. When they compared star performers with average ones in senior leadership positions, nearly 90% of the difference in their profiles was driven by emotional intelligence factors, not cognitive abilities. I mean, wow, right? Intelligence and technical skills definitely matter, for sure, but they're basically just the baseline entry requirements. And this brilliantly illustrates our core opening notion. Daniel Goleman, who really pioneered this concept in the workplace, puts it perfectly. Emotional intelligence is the sine qua non of leadership. It's the absolute prerequisite. You can have the most incisive, analytical mind in the room and an endless supply of brilliant ideas. But without EI, you still won't make a truly great leader. Basically, IQ gets you in the door, but your emotional intelligence dictates exactly how high you're going to climb. Now, EI isn't just some vague, fuzzy, soft skill. It actually breaks down into very manageable, specific core components, kind of moving from the micro to the macro. We're talking about starting internally with self-awareness and self-regulation, then moving outward to motivation and empathy, and finally culminating in social skill. We're going to use this exact roadmap today to explore how the absolute best leaders maximize their own performance and the performance of everyone around them. Section 1. Mastering your inner game. The micro level of leadership. All right, to understand our inner game, we really have to look under the hood at how our brains actually make decisions. You see, we rely heavily on two hardwired processes: pattern recognition and emotional tagging. Emotional tagging is essentially how our brain attaches emotional information to our stored memories. It's like a little flag telling us whether to pay close attention to something or just ignore it. Usually, this system is great. It helps us make quick, effective decisions. But in certain circumstances, these normally reliable hardwired processes can totally betray us. When do they betray us? Well, there are 3 specific red flag conditions that can completely distort those emotional tags and cause even normally brilliant leaders to make terrible judgment calls. First, inappropriate self-interest biases, the emotional weight we place on information. Second, distorting attachments, say to a specific person or a legacy project, can totally blind us. And third, misleading memories. This is when we rely on past experiences that seem super relevant but actually aren't, leading our thinking right off a cliff. A really concrete, albeit tragic, example of this misleading memory trap is Matthew Broderick's response during Hurricane Katrina. He had a ton of experience in military operation centers and previous hurricanes, and that experience taught him that early disaster reports are almost always false. So his brain relied on that past pattern, essentially telling him to wait for the ground truth. But those misleading memories completely blinded him to the totally unique reality of a city that was built below sea level. His emotional tagging betrayed him when it mattered most. So the big question: how do we unhook ourselves from these cognitive traps and the negative thoughts they spin up? Well, we have to practice what psychologists call emotional agility. And you can build this agility through 4 distinct steps. First up, you have to recognize your patterns. Second, carefully label your thoughts and emotions objectively. Third, just accept them without fighting them. And fourth, act in a way that actually aligns with your core values. Let me show you what that labeling step looks like in the real world. Cynthia, a senior corporate lawyer, really struggled with this intense, crushing guilt about missing out at work and at home. But instead of just getting swept up by the thought, "I'm not doing enough," she practiced labeling it. She would literally say to herself, "I'm having the thought that I'm not doing enough." It sounds small, but the simple act of calling a thought just a thought creates incredible space. It lets you view your inner experiences as transient data, rather than absolute, undeniable truths that dictate your behavior. Section 2, Leadership as Emotional Contagion, moving from self to relationships. Okay, so once you've mastered your inner game and built up some emotional agility, you have to wake up to a fundamental neurological truth. Your emotions do not exist in a vacuum. They literally spread. And this brings us to the fascinating concept of primal leadership. Humans actually operate on an open-loop limbic system. That means our emotional centers completely depend on external connections to manage themselves. Because of this interpersonal limbic regulation, a leader's premier, most primal task is managing their own mood. You are the emotional thermostat for your group. Your optimism and high energy, highly infectious to your followers. But so is your panic. Navigating this kind of emotional contagion requires some serious empathy, the ability to really understand the emotional makeup of others. Consider an American consultant who was pitching a big project in Japan. Her team was reading the client's total silence as disapproval, and they literally started packing up their bags. But this highly emotionally intelligent consultant correctly read the client's subtle body language as deep, focused interest. She adapted her behavior in real time, kept the meeting going, and actually won the job. The good news is, you aren't just born with this empathy and self-regulation. You can absolutely rewire your interpersonal habits through practice. Take Tom, an executive who knew full well he had a bad habit of jumping down employees' throats whenever they made mistakes. He decided to use his daily morning commute to actively mentally rehearse asking questions instead of just acting on his impatience. By repeatedly rehearsing those new behaviors, he literally replaced his old neural wiring. And this kind of rewiring is absolutely essential when you're dealing with the interpersonal friction of feedback. So many leaders are terrified of negative feedback. When Jane was told point blank that her presentations were boring, she didn't panic and she didn't punish herself. Instead, she used her emotional intelligence to break that harsh critique down into small, totally manageable goals. She started by just observing good speakers, then she signed up for an introductory class. She actively managed her emotional response to turn a really tough critique into an actionable learning plan. Section 3. Fairness and Group Dynamics, Scaling EI to Teams and Systems. So we've moved from the individual to one-on-one relationships. But when we zoom out to the systemic level, emotional intelligence very often manifests as process fairness. This basically means that an organization cares just as much about how a decision is made as the decision itself. Did you ask for people's input? Did you explain the reasoning behind the call? Process fairness costs literally almost no money, yet it's incredibly powerful. It minimizes the friction of bad decisions and absolutely maximizes employee buy-in. It's essentially the structural application of empathy. Progressive Casualty Insurance proved the massive value of process fairness when they made a really bold move. They started offering potential customers comparison rates from 2 of their competitors, right alongside their own quotes. Now, even when Progressive's rates weren't the lowest, the sheer honesty and transparency of that process generated massive customer goodwill. They treated people fairly, and that emotional connection translated directly into sales. Building this kind of emotional intelligence in groups requires establishing concrete norms at literally every level. The legendary design firm IDEO is a total masterclass in this. They don't just sit around hoping for good teamwork, they structurally build EI norms right into their daily operations. At the individual level, they strictly enforce treating each other caringly. At the group level, they formally assess their collective strengths. And at the cross-boundary level, they actively seek reality checks from their customers. They basically institutionalize emotional intelligence. This kind of structural EI also demands basic, consistent civility right from the top down. And this is beautifully demonstrated by the former CEO of Campbell Soup, Doug Conant. To shift a really toxic culture, he personally sent over 30,000 handwritten notes to employees during his tenure. Think about that volume. By expressing genuine appreciation and honoring role models, he structurally infected his entire massive organization with respect and positive emotional contagion. Section 4. The Architecture of Resilience, Bouncing Back from Disaster. So, what happens when emotionally intelligent systems and individuals face immense crisis and hardship? Well, it all comes down to resilience. Researchers have found that resilient organizations and individuals all share 3 very distinct traits that allow them to survive the dark days. First, they coolly and staunchly accept the harsh realities facing them, no living in denial. Second, they hold a deep belief, usually backed by strong core values, that life and work are meaningful. And third, they have an uncanny ability to improvise. That third trait, the ultimate tool of resilience, is known as bricolage. Bricolage is a fascinating kind of inventiveness. It's the ability to just tinker with whatever is at hand, putting objects or resources to totally unfamiliar uses to bridge the gap between present hardship and a functional future. Resilient leaders are the ultimate bricoleurs. They don't sit around waiting for the perfect conditions or the proper tools. They make do and they invent a way forward. The brilliant Nobel Prize-winning physicist Richard Feynman perfectly demonstrated this kind of intellectual bricolage at Los Alamos. Relying on pure curiosity and his sharp psychological insights into how theoretical physicists actually think, he cobbled together a strategy to crack top-secret safes. He guessed that physicists wouldn't use random numbers, but mathematical constants. And sure enough, he successfully cracked the safes holding atomic bomb secrets simply by trying the constant E. He brilliantly used what he knew about people to solve a mechanical problem. To wrap up this explainer, I really want to leave you with a provocative thought. We've seen that from avoiding cognitive traps, to managing team norms, to surviving absolute crises with bricolage, technical skills are just the baseline. Your emotional legacy, how you manage yourself, and how you infect others around you with your emotional reality is what actually dictates your ultimate success. So the question you have to ask yourself is, what kind of emotional reality are you building today?